Well, hello, I'm Tony Vlaus for ExecuNet. Thanks, as always, for tuning in.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jonathan Bruce. I'm the Chief Product Officer of People Logic. I'm talking to you today from San Rafael, California. It's a great pleasure to chat to everyone here today. We're going to have some fun here today. Talk about some key things that are very meaningful to the day-to-day life that we have here at People Logic. We're going to share some perspectives and really kind of look towards some exciting futures that we have planned. Okay, so for today's talk, we're going to really look at, how we are living in a new world where really the great resignation and the big quit are really hot button topics that we're all talking about. They're topics in boardrooms, they're topics across employees, are really in a new changing landscape of the workforce, where companies are really evaluating how they're going to invest in the future of work. I'm going to spend some time with you to kind of unlock some hidden perspectives about what your organization might be going through. We're going to help kind of give some ideas and perspectives of what you can do today to get ahead of some of this unwanted employee attrition. And in fact, we're going to spend some time really looking and peeling back some of the layers of some of the tools, the systems, and the processes that are available today. And more importantly, spend some time looking at the tools that should be available to allow you to move forward. But let's take a pause here. Let's look at how in fact work is being done today. I think it's fair to assert that a huge percentage of people are doing work from home here. This picture here is not unlike my day-to-day now, where I work from home, building software and building around use cases for our team. A recent report from Pew, reported that nearly 90% of the people who've been working from home during the pandemic are really prefer never to go back to the office, even if it's safe to do so. And so I think employers and employees are really thinking about what that's going to do to change the workplaces. I think in many cases, we reached a tipping point that there are enough companies out there that are going to be offering the opportunity to work from home. And if you're a company that doesn't offer it, or perhaps not even allow it, you're simply not going to be able to hang on to the people or attract the best talent that's out there today. I think it's important to remember that, where employees work is really important. It has some significant implications, not only for how workplaces are designed, but how organizations allocate their budgets, their capital, and manage their staff. And I think there is a real diversity of opinion out there where experts are really divided on what is likely to happen next. Some are going to argue that the experiment from working from home has been so successful that remote work is here to stay. So the hybrid office is really going to take hold. There are others out there that are speculating that people are starving for the face-to-face interactions, and the central business districts, are really primed to come roaring back. I live near San Francisco, and I think the evidence really doesn't necessarily support that. There's a real kind of pockets of activity. It's certainly not evenly happening as well. But I think there's a real split the difference here. There's a split the difference in terms of how we will kind of find a balance between a full-on return to office and a full-on work from home. And we'll talk about some of the kind of key models that we're going to see down the line. There's going to be that group who would prefer to kind of keep things as it was. You're going to have more of the kind of clubhouse model where employees come together when they need to do deep collaboration. You're going to perhaps have, activity-based working, whereby, you'll have an office, but you won't necessarily have an assigned desk, the kind of hot desk methodology. Or you may even have a kind of hub and spoke model whereby you have a large office right in the center of the area and then smaller satellite offices scattered around the world for large entities, or perhaps even fully virtual. The gamuts here. I would say also that there's a whole new set of inclusionary economics. Those are big words. What do these mean? Inclusionary economics means the ability to be able to pull talent and to have a deeper pool of capability for your employees right across the globe. Even if I think how we work today here at People Logic, we have employees right across the globe. Why is that the case? Because the talent pool and the underlying infrastructure that's available today allows for that to happen. So no longer are we kind of required to bring everyone together. We can be highly effective no matter where we are. That provides massive opportunities for companies as well in terms of being able to pull the talent not only at different price points, but be able to have a much more equitable view of the kind of skill sets to go after the problems that they want to build and the value they want to build for their customers. Of course, there's a whole new set of tools that are proliferating. These are rapidly democratizing the ability to build from anywhere here. I love the picture in the background here. This really kind of gets a sense of, what are the kind of tools that we traditionally use here. I'm very lucky today. I just need my phone here, which is beside me here, my laptop, and I can work from anywhere in the world and contribute and build IP for work with my team around the world. And I feel uniquely privileged to be able to do so. Now, that in of itself presents some key challenges here. I think we'll all recognize here that the post-pandemic reality is here to stay. And what are we going to do about that to move forward? All right, let's look and let's peel back on some of the major changes that are underway right now. We'll start with collaboration. Hybrid work is so much more commonplace in that people have tasted what it could be like to have much more optionality in working from different places. And hybrid work really means, I feel, the ability to work in a way that brings you together next to the people that you need to work with in a way that makes sense when it's critical that you have to have one-on-one or group type activity. I'd also argue that return to office doesn't really mean return to office. I think the balance and the kind of patterns that we're seeing right now is that the return to office will be driven by the degree of collaboration that is necessary. And there are also different moments, different occasions as you go through your product life cycles or your customer life cycles where you need to bring two people together in a large scale in order to do things in a much more kind of synchronous fashion. I also think that the major changes are underway in terms of how innovations are going to happen. Innovations really can now happen anywhere. We've seen pockets of this, but I don't think the concentration of innovation will be sustainable or will be sustained long term. And I think the operators who live next to the innovators right now will have to find a whole new set of levers to succeed and how they can scale the kind of innovations and bring them to market in ways that have not been done before. I also think the interactions are going to change as well. The split between more real-time communications and balancing some of the asynchronous touch points are going to be really key here. I think we can all ask the question here, is your organization ultimately going to be prepared for what's coming here? So what is that tipping point? I'd argue we have. There's no question that there is change ahead in the journey that we are on here, in how we are going to work together and how we're going to innovate and how, as operators, we're going to bring to life some of the key innovations that some of our most smartest people have been developing here. Let's look at how, what is happening in the industry to facilitate that. So I think it's really important to also recognize that across the collaboration, the innovation, the interaction, that's a very contextual impact depending on where you sit. As an owner of an organization, as a CEO, as a line manager, as a VP, SVP, or as an individual contributor, the impact of collaboration, the impact of innovation, impact of interactions, and how you actually go about it means something very different for each of these contexts here. But if you peel back the layers a little more, it means that we are expecting a lot, much of the same, but we're asking a lot more of our organizations, of our managers, and of our employees. And then we are tracking these along many of the traditional tools that you've seen there today. So the likes of KPIs, alignment, talent growth, and consistency. But I think it's important to recognize here that some key things are happening here. Now, I pulled a quote here from someone I used to work with as well, and he commented recently on a LinkedIn post that I had here. This is Glenn Lewis. He's a chief architect at Ancestry, and he kind of drew a very, very important point for me that I wanted to share with you today here. What he says here is he's someone who's been in the workforce for 30 plus years. He thinks remote work hasn't been detrimental to him personally. But there's a real kind of gap that's emerging here, that so much of the mentoring that he benefited from when he was earlier on in his career, the interaction time, the kind of short check-in meetings, the kind of side-by-side, over-the-shoulder kind of observation was hugely impactful for him in watching both the good and the bad choices people made around him, and how he learned, and that actually it was able to kind of enrich and really kind of give a practical aspect to any formal training he got in university. For him, that felt it as a big loss. I think it's something we need to take on board and really kind of process as we move forward as operators, as innovators, and those who are running their companies who are trying to manage their employees and manage attrition rates that may be out of control. So I think, generally speaking, as operators of companies, many of those owners are looking to really kind of push forward on a number of key tracks here. Companies are pushing very concretely to deepen customer trust. By that, I mean to bring value and to bring understanding of their customers in a way that is really critical. And part of their ability to do that is being able to make sure that they have a very kind of a deep, broad and wide understanding of their organizational health that is actually supporting their customers. Without that kind of healthy kind of customer organization behind them, the ability to deliver deep customer trust is somewhat in question. There's an aspect of improved sustainability. How can you create an environment that ensures that your employees are not going to burn out? That the things that you're asking of them in this very changed, much more hybrid, much more diverse world is not going to push your employees to a point whereby they cannot sustain. We recognize also that many companies have been forced and many verticals have been forced in a dramatic sense through a set of digital transformations that no one quite planned for, and that was exacerbated by some of the pandemic inputs that we saw. Healthcare is a great example of that. But we also want to kind of push in the same vein with the same set of aspects, gains in productivity. And there's some interesting data points that we'll uncover a little later on that show some of the gains in productivity are somewhat expected and also somewhat not expected. Net, I think we can all admit that there's a real kind of set of triggers in place that can really push employees to a real new set of uncontrolled attrition and burnout. What does that do? What does that do to business owners? It introduces a set of risks that they need to manage. And as we have been learning, as we've seen over the past few years, that this is introducing a set of risks that could be very detrimental to the health of your business. But happy to report, nature is healing. Let's take a breath here. Let's take a moment to explore what the industry is doing to understand what they can do to help facilitate this. And what we are seeing here is that the innovators are circling here. So there's a general kind of industry feeling that there is there's an opportunity here. And how could we possibly do this? So what we're going to do here is we're going to focus a couple of the aspects here. So we're look at the innovators out there who are focusing on what are the kind of things you can do, the tools, the technologies you bring to bear to help support the human, the individual. We're going to look at what are the kind of sets of technologies that are out there that actually help focus on the technology. Look at the kind of the functions. What are the kind of functional specific practices and tools that are emerging to really help people right now? And then we'll look at the practice. These are the kind of practices that people are introducing to help support their employees and distinguish their companies as a place that is embracing the hybrid model in a way that's compelling. So approach number one. You focus on the human, and what we'll see here is you'll see a couple of patterns here whereby you'll see companies leaning in deeply to really ask their employees to really understand the sense and the kind of posture that they have and how their workday is. But the problem that we are seeing here is employees are exhausted by receiving endless and ever more frequent net promoter score surveys. And these, the investments that we see here, ultimately are becoming less and less effective. But there are definitely some investments that are happening in pulling out sentiment and other artificial intelligence kind of glean insights around the kind of surveys that we have here. But I will make the point here that surveying endlessly is exhausting for the employees, and ultimately, is not necessarily going to be the right basis that we feel is going to be able to provide a sustainable viewpoint for the signals that are kind of breathing life into how your organizational health is improving or the reverse, not improving. I think there's a whole set of new experiences that are coming to life as well. Lattice and Bamboo is a great example of this, whereby we're now able to dashboard the employee life cycle. So you can understand, what are the things we need to have ready for employees when they join, to sustain them through various different promotional cycles, to make sure the 360 feedback loops are much more effective and much more transparent. But give employees the tools and managers the tools such that they can understand employees in an HR analytics vein. This is an interesting approach, and I think it's very valid as well, but it does require a significant a degree of employee engagement as well. And the employee engagement here requires, in a sense, process change. It doesn't necessarily link in seamlessly into how companies work today. I think around the experiences and the kind of data points around people analytics, this is typically driven by and requires a set of investments by company that is often out of the reach of small to medium sized companies. By pulling together all this people data, you need to kind of with the sponsorship of people success in HR, the kind of sentiment and keyword analysis can be very difficult to do, can be very expensive, and does have a significant risk of bias as well. And of course, deep consultant engagements. This is very much the kind of the purview of the Fortune 500 here, where you can bring in a Deloitte or a McKinsey in here, whereby they can understand and decompose the kind of performance bottlenecks of how your organization is functioning. But ultimately, this is something that is mostly out of the reach right now. Some very interesting things are happening here. So there's definitely a lean in across the board here to focus on the human here. Let's see what else is happening here. With number 2 here is, of course, it's about, focusing on the technology. So, what can we see in terms of at an IT, at a technology level that we can bring and put it in our employees' hands to start, really eliminating thrash and to boost productivity, to boost communication, to boost mobility, but also put the company in the right place whereby kind of a zero trust model is in place such that a company can support the highly diverse hybrid model and be confident that they're not introducing attack vectors into their infrastructure that they wouldn't necessarily want to sustain. There's the bring your own device and perspective. I think a very early kind of indication of that is when we were all allowed to bring our iPhones and put Office email on it. That offers the kind of a real perspective in this. But I think the emphasis around zero trust and flexibility and open policies and how employees work is really important as well. And there's a ton of MDM kind of capabilities that are coming to life to help with that. There's, of course, then always the push around digital transformation as well. This is an often used word and abused word in my view, but really it's, it is the precursor and the kind of driven by, this new model whereby we want to kind of tackle technologies and processes, push to cloud, and bring to life a whole set of new agile processes to kind of help realize some of these anticipated efficiencies that are coming. And of course, the app modernization here. So whereby you can sunset apps, broken apps and technology stacks that are just not suited to this new hybrid, this new highly dynamic world, and bring in tools that foster these kind of innovations and creativity as well. Okay, so far we've seen some great investments around human focus and right technology. Let's look at the function as well. That, of course, you see really the kind of the functional specific investments that we see here happening. This has been happening for many years already, I feel. Whether it's offerings around from Salesforce, from HubSpot, to help optimize and move you closer to your customers so you can have a pretty, a full customer 360 view and allow you to connect to your customers in whole new ways. You have the ability to kind of have transformational kind of service experiences. Zendesk being a real trailblazer here, where you can scale with your customer needs and honestly empower your teams to allow customers to support themselves. You have, massive innovations that are happening and allowing engineering teams to, work from anywhere. We have, GitHub and GitLab out there, building a whole new capability and, continuous integration and continuous development models that allow them to benefit from all this infrastructure. And again, really kind of flatten the level between where innovation and operators actually come together. And then operating, up-level marketing, whereby, that funnel optimization, so that you can instrument and execute meaningful models to drive opportunities is all happening down the line. Now, and then lastly, there's the focus on practice here as well. So there are a number of companies out there here who are doing some really interesting, models here. One I would cite, ThredUp, the secondhand clothes retailer that recently went IPO to the market, have some very interesting models in place that they have talked about publicly, whereby they have learned through some of the experiences that they had in during the pandemic that in fact they were able to bring a whole set of new practices to life. And they're figuring out what it might be to, from companies that they've learned where they've introduced somewhat furlough days, that that productivity could be gained, adopting the 4-day weeks, adopting no meeting Thursdays, something that we did at Salesforce a lot. It really inspires a couple of key models that change. It inspires a set of ruthless prioritizations in terms of what you do together when you're in the office together. It really helps kind of accelerating meetings that need to die, might die sooner. But it also is very much focuses the companies on the outputs. It's not about the hours, but the results that you are down the line. Let's take a step back here, because honestly, what's something happens is each of the approaches here, whether it's on the human, whether it's on the technology, whether it's on the practice, is actually quite siloed here. There's underlying all of this, there are signals going on that, one could correlate, if one could correlate, would be really, really interesting to bring to life what's going on across all of these capabilities that are happening in this siloed state right now. And we like to think of this as like the intersection of both people and process and technology. So if you were able to kind of glean a view of that and be able to correlate what's happening on that, you would get a much, much deeper sense of what's happening with the organization. You would put yourself in a position where you could get in a much more anticipatory state of what employees may be burning out, what employees may be likely to attrit much sooner. And that's just the beginning here. And this is where we're going to do the real fun part here. We're going to learn about what it might be to kind of imagine a new future state here. So let's imagine this here. I'd like us to imagine a kind of a new all digital work model where companies can make sure that they are best placed to be successful with the customers with every interaction. And to do that, they need to make sure that their team is on this new kind of footing, an operational health model to help meet this new challenge here. But I think it's really important that you need to know your innovators. You know your innovators, those who are typically you have placed in a position to be able to build new IP, to create new opportunity for your companies, and be able to operate in that regard. But remember, innovators don't necessarily build shareholder value; they're building stakeholder value. And by stakeholder value, they're building value for those that are around them, those who are in sales, those who are in services, those who are in customer success, et cetera, et cetera. What can we do to understand our innovators? What are their needs, such that those who are operators, those who are bringing those to life, who are ultimately bringing those values and be able to kind of operate, scale, and push out the boundaries of what that value is around the innovators? What can we do here? What are the kind of signals we need to understand to be able to know your innovators, know your operators, which by you can bring this to life? Let's take a couple of examples here. These are kind of, 2 examples that I pulled recently as I was preparing for this presentation to really kind of understand what might be examples of companies who've kind of made some progress, or those who are in the academic field who are really observing at a level where things are happening first. I love this kind of example here from GitLab, where we have an individual here whereby he understood that if he was able to ski first and work later, he would change the model and change his life in a highly advantageous way. So he could avoid the point that he experienced earlier on in his career, where he is in unsustainable work practices that was really compounded by a really, really bad, poor work and life balance here. And he wanted to find a path whereby he could really live to the value of don't wait. And that was espoused very much by GitLab as well. He really got to a point whereby he was able to measure results and not necessarily measure his productivities by how many hours he's spending in front of a screen. But I think the point I would make here, this was a very individual undertaking as well. This individual had to take the huge initiative here to, in a sense, self-correct and to go through that attrition gateway himself to really understand how he was ultimately going to change his model for himself to bring that to life. And he was lucky that he was part of GitLab to be able to kind of go that model here. There's a real interesting opportunity here. What if, there was a set of capabilities out there whereby everybody, a much broader diaspora, could be able to benefit from that kind of revelatory experience you want to hear down the line. I think I'd also kind of recognize here, there's an amazing podcast that I'd recommend you all take a look at here, done by Adam Grant, where he's working with some academics out of Stanford to really understand, how indeed hybrid workplaces allow their employees to do the best work. They had a great example of a company in China who scaled to about 30,000 people who applied an experiment using a pretty robust data model, I feel, for a certain cohort of employees to work from home and a certain cohort of employees to work in office. And they applied some measures using surveys, which we'll get to later on, to understand ultimately, which proved better. And they understood using this data model that ultimately those who were subject to the hybrid model, who had that flexibility, their hours were very, very different. In fact, they even measured that the hours that they worked were less, and certainly around less concentrated times. They often worked in the evenings, they often worked in the weekends, but by choice and given the freedoms that those employees were afforded, they were able to ultimately have a much more productive outcomes. And these employees were measured as happier. But they did understand, and they were able to cohort that there was really kind of key kind of groupings in their employee group. There was both the individual employees were the sum of their efforts, so kind of like customer service or customer success, and teams worked very, very ideally and could potentially sustain a full work from home type model. There were more relay teams whereby work must pass between teams, and this is the world I would typically work in here, where I will work with product or engineering or marketing or our customer success teams to really understand what's going on with our customers. And there's a lot of interchange and exchange of information as well. And then, of course, there were teams that really required to be together on a more frequent basis, but not exclusively together, where there was a much more intensive groupthink required. But it was interesting to kind of watch this conversation as they went through this podcast here. It was that they relied very, very much on the kind of the success and the execution of good surveying of their employees to really understand and try to build themselves to a point where they could have these repeatable outcomes. So let's kind of understand, what might be the future here. I think there's an opportunity here around embracing a whole new generation of tools, a set of technologies that are able to bring the signals I just talked about and bring those signals around people, processes, and technologies that deliver a set of not only packaged insights, but exploratory capabilities in a highly trusted, privacy conscious world, whereby there's a control plane where you can ask questions to understand and also quantify the kind of organizational health risks that you have in place. I think insights and recommendations that are cohorted around functional groups can be tied to deep experiences from industry experts, and there's an opportunity to package and kind of bake out what might be the effective patterns and signals that illustrate in either sales or service or engineering groups. I think they're in the same vein here. Not only they can drawing out the highly efficacious processes here, it's also the same processes that can be highlighted to learn out where are these signs of attrition, where these signs of burnouts, and where these signs of inefficiency and thrashes actually lie. I think it also maps very concretely to kind of risk management as well. If you have employees who are taking on board a significant amount of the work and those employees were to go on vacation or become sick, that can introduce significant risk. And very often managers aren't able to quite quantify exactly the kind of work that our employees are doing, nor are employees quite able to kind of get that across in kind of the typical status meeting model as well. So getting a sign of that understanding and be able to build a model and build an understanding around these patterns, the trends, it puts many companies in a point whereby not only are they kind of understand the trends that have gotten there, but most importantly, puts them in a context whereby they can develop a predictive posture for where they can ultimately instrument, then can model, test, and verify what might be the things that they need to do to kind of then operationalize for around future patterns of customer health. I'd also recognize here that there's a seamless integration that is required. In any kind of consideration, any strategy you have to better manage kind of employee attrition and burnout here, you have to recognize that, introducing a whole set of new practices can actually introduce yet more stress more anguish into the organization as well. So looking for technologies, looking for capabilities that are able to embrace how companies are working together today, I think is really important. Really important because ultimately that's where the signals lie. If you disrupt where those signals are, you'll necessarily put yourself in a position you may miss some of the key patterns that are actually going on right there. So look for those kind of capabilities that are able to kind of absorb how work is done today, both the kind of vertical tools that you see here, whether it be Salesforce or Jira for Atlassian, or more the kind of broad horizontal kind of tools that allow people to cross communicate, the G Suites, the Slacks, the 365s, these kind of things as well. So you need to be able to integrate into those in a seamless manner with the right privacy concerns kind of down the line. But I think there's an opportunity for us here to kind of continue the conversation. The conversation here is that, as a kind of those who are running businesses, those who are managers who are looking to build a whole new event horizon around organizational health, is a real opportunity here. The opportunity is to kind of democratize what organizational health should be here. It's really a kind of an unconquered kind of opportunity here to kind of systematize what a challenge that I feel some saw coming, but saw coming in the kind of verticals and the kind of cohorts that we talk down the line. I think while organizational health is not especially a new topic, I think some of the recent events have really propelled it to something that is right part of the conversation today. But I think together, there's a real opportunity here. The barriers between employees and managers to have the tools at their disposal so that they can work better and find that flywheel for the next generation companies is right ahead of us here. And it's a journey I'm excited to be on. So with that, I'm going to say thank you. It's been a great pleasure to present to everyone today. I'll take a pause here and I'd love to take a few of those questions if there's anything out there.
Jonathan, Tony, thank you. Yeah, this is Tony. So we have a few questions to get to, but I want to encourage everyone to follow the link that Kim shared earlier. If you'd like to speak with Jonathan or others at PeopleLogic after today's session, that's your opportunity to do so. So follow the link. They'd be more than happy to talk to you about your individual organization's concerns, challenges, and how they could help you overcome them as we shift between these two worlds, right? So let's talk about hybrid work. Jonathan, what new rituals have you noticed have emerged to engage people who are in that hybrid model? What has excited you as a way of working that you possibly haven't seen before?
I think there's some that I have seen before, and I think some people are taking that much more seriously. I think a couple of great examples is the 4-day week, right? The 4-day week that recognizes that, moments whereby the 5-day week sometimes is not necessarily sustainable, but in fact, work can in fact happen at any times. I think, supporting that model, that the 4-day week is in fact something that the organization needs to adopt wholly and not just for individual contributors, and that the leaders would potentially abuse that is something that is taken seriously. And that's a recognition that, that is a kind of springboard for employees to really embrace hobbies, to kind of tend to their self, tend to their families. I'm a father, I can certainly understand that. That ultimately kind of brings people with a set of energy and a set of productivity that was not there before as well. And there's been a couple of examples that I've lived myself. I remember when I worked at Salesforce, we had what we called No Meeting Thursday. No Meeting Thursday was a massively effective tool that whereby meetings could happen. What it really meant was, larger meetings that were much more formal in that regard. You could still interface with people, but it kind of gave a relaxing space and gave confidence that people could kind of focus on their own task at hand. And it was a great moment of connectivity. I think what's shifting here is that, that kind of no meeting moment doesn't exclusively happen to happen on a specific day. At that time at Salesforce, I think there was a concern organizationally that email, on Friday, if that no meeting day was to happen on a Friday, would die out by lunchtime because everyone would be driving up to Tahoe to go skiing. That was a deep concern. I think that some of the practices that are in place, the kind of expectations and the cross-organizational kind of accountability people have is changing that, in that people know that is the model, and we all appreciate the model that we can now live. and there's a set of responsibility that people have in terms of kind of making sure that we maintain that productivity and the results-driven outcomes that we want.
Thanks for that. So most organizations, of course, understand what risk management is. Many don't get what organizational health actually is. How do the two relate, Jonathan?
I think there's a strong correlation between risk management and organizational management, organizational health. Risk management in terms of, the likelihood of the investment you would have to make around retraining, retooling, and in a sense building trust with net new employees is a significant risk and potential deceleration to growth and risk in terms of managing and understanding your customers is an absolute risk, and you could correlate very strongly, almost equate, I feel, risk management around organizational health, in my view. And I think the ability in terms of the kind of promises that you make your customers. So, like, I live in product every day. I'm all about the notion of setting expectations with my customers, setting expectations with my sales teams, and all the stakeholders that I work with every day. If there isn't a strong belief that I have a healthy organization behind those assertions that I'm making as well, that introduces significant risks into expectation management of your customers. And I think having a healthy organization and being attentive to the needs of your organization around that, attentive to burnout, I think is a massive contributor to managing that risk. And managing that risk in a positive fashion. I'm very much more a fan of managing to the positive. But of course, risk is, in a sense, managing to the negative here. But I think it reduces the kind of that impulse that you have. And having the right tools in place and the right kind of frameworks around that in place I think is hugely contributory.
What are some good examples, Jonathan, of companies that have invested in organizational health, and what outcomes have you noticed?
Yeah, two examples I would give here. One would be PagerDuty. I think PagerDuty have invested in an informal sense around organizational health and the kind of outcomes that they are seeing in their ability to deliver value add around their core value proposition. Has really been to show, and you can see that both in their numbers, you can see that both in the kind of product velocity that they're enjoying, and I have some personal touch points there as well in terms of the kind of happiness that I see that people I work in there as well. I think there are other entities that PeopleLogic also has had the privilege to work with as well, whereby they are seeing direct correlations around the investments that they are making in actually bringing in tools that are able to bring to life the signals that they are seeing around organizational health as well. We have some great examples here at PeopleLogic as well, who ultimately, Edge being a great example, whereby the kind of signals that they've had has been allowed them to kind of manage their growth in a way that is ultimately more sensible, more sustainable. So I talked about sustainability, but sustainability is really important for companies who are growing in this hybrid world. They're hyper growth companies as well. They're aligning themselves with very concrete and often ambitious goals across very different cultures, across massively distributed time zones. I myself had meetings most recently, I think it was across almost 12 different time zones as well. I think this is the new normal. So, those who are investing and really understanding the pressure points that are being introduced by this new hybrid model are seeing that benefit of health systems. So there are definitely examples out there as well. But I think that it shouldn't necessarily be the purview of those who can afford it. There's a huge opportunity out there for companies like PeopleLogic, like ourselves, who are going down the path of democratizing this.
Jonathan, you've drawn our attention to several key company wants and needs. What are you seeing as current wants and needs of the employees?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think from my perspective, the wants and needs of the employees bucket out into a couple of key things, and this is not a definitive list. I think number one is to be heard. make sure that their needs are being heard and understood, and that that their management teams are investing in the kind of capabilities and the practices and the frameworks that show that their efforts are being appreciated, such that they are not we're going to see a dying art, and the dying art of people don't typically leave their companies, they typically leave their managers. And I'd love to kind of be a part of that conversation to how we can put employees and stand on the, help boost employees' perspective to kind of really package and be able to present out, the kind of work that they were doing as well. Part of the benefits I feel of the kind of organizational health is that they'll ultimately be in a position to kind of represent the value that they have to organizations in a much more concrete fashion, and see ultimately the contribution that they can make into those organizations and how they can be a net contributor to that. I think that's really key. The other point I would make here is that that we do this in a very open and a very transparent way, and that we are wholly respectful, and our number one value here is trust around privacy, and that we understand that privacy is hugely important for employees and how we go about this as well. So it's something we think about a lot about here, and I think the transparent and trust model will sustain us moving forward here. But I think it's a conversation. Organizational health is not a purview of the managers or the CEO. It's a shared responsibility, and it's a shared benefit for all.
I'd like to ask a couple of questions, Jonathan, about the work at PeopleLogic. What are the advantages to using something like PeopleLogic versus another performance management tool?
I think one of the advantages we have is that the seamless aspect of our tool, in that we are able to come into an organization, be non-disruptive to how our organization is actually functioning. And we do that by our ability to integrate into where work is being done today. With a hugely diverse set of integrations, we have upwards of 40 right now, and it's growing every day. That puts us in a position whereby we can understand baseline and really get to a point whereby we can fully appreciate how work is being done, and really kind of build a very instructional and insightful set of insights and recommendations that are packaged and tuned around various functions to offer immediate insights for customers as well. But I think there's also an understanding aspect as well. I mentioned that in my presentation, in terms of putting employers, putting managers in a position whereby they can understand what may be going on in the organization, and understand who is working under very stressful conditions, who is potentially an outlier in the organization whereby they are not necessarily working as closely as they would like. And that helps them understand ultimately, where might a particular employee be behaving in a way that might be not productive, or be kind of breeding a new sense of unhealthiness. I think the other aspect as well is that we're with that ability to kind of have the package insights, the package recommendations, that really kind of is a real boost. And I think some of the futures we're thinking about here at PeopleLogic is that ultimately that puts many of the customers that we have in a great place where they can see where they are today, be able to look back to what got them there. But also there's some exciting futures that we're working on, whereby we'll put our customers in a place whereby they can model out scenarios, hugely important in risk management for potential organizational health outcomes that are both advantageous and disadvantageous to the health of their business, and be able to get in a point whereby they can get in more of a predictive posture, so they can understand what might be outcomes that they are not anticipating. Again, massively important for that correlation I talked about around risk management and organizational health.
I'm sure you've encountered more than a couple of highly skeptical critics, right, of the hybrid model. Claims that it's the best of both worlds. Some have said it's the recipe for disaster. How do you help organizations more fully get their head around both the opportunity but the perceived challenges when you are presenting PeopleLogic or simply evangelizing the things you've shared with us today? What's a good starting point for the disbelief or the naysayers?
So I think the word evangelize is almost dangerous here. Okay. Evangelize means that, there's a kind of a you're with us or against us type mode here. I think a degree of pragmatism is really important here in that, this is a model that is highly tunable and highly configurable, right? The hybrid model based on the needs of your employees as well. This is not a one size fits all thing. But as I talked about here, there are the emergence of different groups, whether you're a relay team or whether, you're a team that needs to work more like a soccer team, kind of you need to work 11 aside and having a much more coordinated game plan over a team of set players here. I think there's a varying degree of connectivity that you're looking for within and across those cohorts as well. And I think, providing that flexibility and providing the insights and, the recommendations around that, but to do that instrumentation in a way that is fully inclusive and in a transparent fashion, ultimately will, provide the right kind of transparency that I think is necessary for those naysayers. I think the naysayers that are out there are those that I've listened to, those that I've debated with, who will tell you that, I want my innovators in the office 5 days a week. In fact, I want them there on the weekends as well. I do believe that there are moments, yes, when people need to come together. Sure. Is that something you need to do, ad infinitum? No, I don't believe that. I think, there are benefits that I have learned myself in my career when, yes, we are together and we can collaborate and be on a whiteboard as well. But I think we've also learned that, the world doesn't necessarily be that way, to be that way. And that I can, deliver a ton more. I can be, have a much deeper relationship with my kids. I can, make sure that I get my run in every morning, but still be able to kind of think through highly complex customer challenges, deliver innovations that I think will offer sea change to people. But I think, there's a new framework. That framework is around practices. It's around understanding human beings, it's understanding, the processes and the technologies, but making sure there's the right cross-section and understanding of the observability of those signals around each of those things will help with that. I think there will always be naysayers, and as I say, I don't expect the entire industry will shift this way, but I definitely think it introduces a massive hybrid opportunity for all. I also think, there's some very important examples I would give right now in that if you look at what's going on in the Ukraine, very sad. There's a lot of individuals there who've been deeply affected by the situation as well. But there's also an opportunity for those who want to kind of embrace a life that allows them to kind of have some continuity with and some normalization to their work as well. This hybrid model is an opportunity for those who want to continue to sustain their business in the Ukraine. And, PeopleLogic is part of that conversation as well. We have an amazing partner there in the Ukraine who's doing some amazing work for us as well. And I think I'm very grateful, frankly, that, we have belief and we have a kind of a concrete framework around us that allows us to be able to benefit from their talent, and our customers equally are benefiting from their contribution.
Lovely answer. We're going to start to wrap this up. I want to leave just a few moments at the end, Jonathan, for any final thoughts you might have to share. But let me begin with thank you. Thank you for sharing your insight, for making time for us today. Thank you all for tuning in. You've asked some wonderful questions. It's a privilege for me to ask them because I learned a lot simply by doing so. So thanks for that. And Jonathan, turning it back to you, any final thoughts for our listeners today before we officially wrap up today's session?
Well, first, as always, a thank you. Thank you for all for listening. Thank you for your great questions. It's always fun to engage in this way. I will leave you on this note, is that the time is right. Time is right. This is what can compel me to come solve a difficult problem like this. I look back in my career, I've always had the greatest success, when there's an intersection of data and real business problems here. This is that moment whereby, we have the right tools, we have the right policy frameworks, we have the right organizational framework to kind of move forward the needle on organizational health here. It's an unconquered opportunity that is not the sole purview of PeopleLogic as well. We're delighted to be a part of that conversation. So come check us out, peoplelogic.ai, and we'll continue this conversation on our blog as well. And thank you again. Thank you, Tony.
Wonderful. Thank
good
you,
afternoon.
Jonathan. Thank you
Yep.
all. I look forward to seeing you at the next session of ExecuNet Master Class. Bye for now.